Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of On the Mark, television on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and radio at 89.5 FM WSKB. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. We're broadcasting this morning from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy. And our first guest this morning is a physician turned author, Victor Acquista. He was a primary care physician here in Western Massachusetts, where some of you may have been his patients, and would then turn to writing about integral health, and then turned into writing about novels. And he's got a new novel out called Serpent Rising, which just received an International Book Award. And it's always a great pleasure to get a chance to talk with an author on this program, but even a better pleasure to get to talk to an author who's a personal friend. So good morning, Victor.
Well, good morning, Mark. It's just a delight to be with you, and I want to thank you and Westfield Community College for inviting me to have this time together with you and your audience.
Well, the last time we got a chance to chat, we were sitting at the steaming tender in Palmer as the trains were rolling by. That was kind of a cool thing for me. And you had just kind of left practicing medicine to write a book about integral health. And that book was published, became a hit in the United States, but you also ultimately went to Europe with it, and it was published in other languages. And now you've turned around to writing fiction and sci-fi. What made you decide that you wanted to be a writer in the first place?
Well, I don't think there was a conscious decision. I appreciate how communicating is an important life skill. That certainly was very important in my work as a physician, to be able to communicate effectively. I certainly have enjoyed reading since a very young age. I remember I used to walk to the library, take out books, and I was an avid reader as a youth. And for me, I really do distinguish between writing nonfiction and writing fiction. Nonfiction to me is primarily a left brain activity where you're assembling information, trying to put a spin on it, or some unique insight, and sharing that with your readers, hopefully in a compelling way. Writing fiction to me is really more of a right brain activity where you're in the playground of your imagination, and you get to create story and characters. Kind of, you just weave the tale in your head, and hopefully are able to tell it in a way that's engaging and interesting, and people enjoy reading. So I really enjoy writing fiction better because it's a lot more fun.
Yeah. Do you spend a certain part of the day or a certain part of time every day writing, or do you write in, like an idea comes to you and you write for days on end, or do you find yourself disciplined to writing at a certain time every day?
Well, in this new career endeavor, which I really have been pursuing aggressively for the last 6 or 7 years now, I pretty much do all the things you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to write every day. You're supposed to be disciplined. But I'm a very streaky writer. For instance, recently, following my second COVID vaccination, I was down really in bed feeling relatively miserable for one day. And as I lay in bed, I got this idea for a short story, which I then, furiously wrote until, I was able to discharge it from my brain, literally. It's like I get possessed for a while, and then I write. Of course, after that, there's an editing process, which, requires a different energy. But that's the way I write. And my first science fiction novel, that book was in my head for 20 years. I mean, it had to come out. I just couldn't let it stay there forever. This recent book, Serpent Rising, took a little while to gestate. I had an idea about the reality that people have a difficult time distinguishing truth from fiction, or truth from falsehood, more accurately. And I wanted to write about that because I like to have social themes embedded into my storyline. And it took me a while to conceptualize a character and a storyline that could enable me to tell that story.
And do you edit your own work or do you give it to somebody else to edit?
In my early writing, I was doing most of my own editing. I do have a software program that is useful for editing, but now I send out everything for professional editing, or the publisher. They expect a certain level of editing once you've submitted something to them, but the final editing and what have you is really done through the publisher. If it's a book, if it's a magazine, or short story, then that's all on me, and I use a professional editor for that.
And Serpent Rising just won an award. You sent me an email the other day. What was it like to? How did you feel when your work got acknowledged that way? That must be an incredible thrill.
Yes, it's very validating, because part of the reason I write is I want to share something with people, and you get a certain satisfaction when you see that your book is meeting some sales. You get some satisfaction when reviews come in, which hopefully are positive reviews. For Serpent Rising, they've been very positive. But to get an award is an additional level of recognition. And I'll be candid, I have insecurities as a writer. As a physician, I really felt I had a solid grasp of what I was doing, both as a primary care physician and then when I turned into towards administrative medicine. But in writing, this award, like I say, is very validating for me, and says connotes a certain level of accomplishment and skill in the craft.
Now, prior to the pandemic, authors would go out there and they do readings and book signings to get the word out about their book. But also, in the course of doing a reading, you get an audience response of sort. Were you able to do online readings or Zoom readings during the pandemic, or did you pretty much have to put your touring on hold?
Well, I had in my marketing plan events, and bookstore sorts of things lined up, which all got couldn't do those because of the pandemic. But I have done some Zoom events, and any book club participants who might be listening in, I am available, and I love to Zoom in and interact with readers. I find that to be very, very enjoyable and engaging for me as an author, and you get that connection with the readers. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, I'm sure. How many books do you, or let's say, how many writing projects do you work on at a time? Do you go from one book to the next, or do you have a couple that you're working on simultaneously?
Well, there's different phases. One of which is writing, and then another phase is editing. We talked a little bit about that. There's pre-launch activities, there's post-launch activities, there's book marketing and promotion. Um, so there are different steps along the way, and I have projects that are in all of those phases right now, whether it's the writing, whether it's the editing, or marketing, post-marketing, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So Serpent Rising came out, I guess, last year, and just got this award. Do you see a future for it, perhaps as a film treatment or TV or something along those lines?
Well, I think a lot of novelists, that is something they aspire towards, having their work adapted to film. Serpent Rising is book one of a two-book series called The Saga of Venom and Flame. The second book was supposed to come out this August, which is a year following the release of Serpent Rising, but it got pushed back because of COVID. But I think the storyline and the characters that are in this two book series, I think would be very, very adaptable for film, and I think would be very interesting. But of course, a lot of novelists, feel that way about their work.
You had asked when we were talking prior if it might be possible for you to read an excerpt from Serpent Rising, and I would love to if you'd read like an opening or but first describe a little bit about what the book is about.
Well, sure. I'd love to do a quick reading. As I had mentioned previously, I had this concern that mankind has a difficulty distinguishing truth from falsehood. And this was well before people were talking about fake news and what have you. But because of this difficulty, they're vulnerable to propaganda and at the mercy of powerful interests who maybe have an agenda that is served by, feeding people misinformation or partial truths and what have you. So I wanted to have a character who was a truth warrior, a light bearer, someone who would shine the light of truth in darkness. And I particularly wanted to have a female character as my protagonist. And I like flawed characters. I think they're so much more interesting and relatable. And so I came up with a young woman who had PTSD, and she had PTSD because of a traumatic incident during her childhood that really was a secret initiation into a warrior class of truth warriors, a group that I call the Luminarians, but specifically a faction of the Luminarians called the Candelaria carrying the flame of truth, that sort of imagery. And her life is really messed up. And in the beginning of the book, she's really not that likable, but that's intentional because she's living out of sync with what her true destiny is. Her true destiny is to be this light bringer and truth warrior. So is that sufficient sort of background, you think?
Yeah. Why don't we take a quick underwriting break to acknowledge the underwriters that make On the Mark and other programs here possible. And we come back and you can read a segment from the book. It'd be the first time that an author has ever read something from a work on the Mark, so it's kind of exciting for me. We're chatting with the author Victor Acquista. You are either watching us on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 or listening to us on 89.5 FM WSKB. I'm Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. If you've missed a part of today's programming or you want to catch another edition of On the Mark, they're all archived on YouTube at WSKB Community Radio. We'll be right back, and Victor Acquista will read from his new book, Serpent Rising.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by Bay State Dental. Comprehensive dentistry at 14 convenient locations in Springfield, Chicopee, Longmeadow, West Springfield, Belchertown, East Longmeadow, Ludlow, Northampton, Greenfield, and Wilbraham, as well as 29 Broad Street in Westfield. Bay State Dental makes it a priority to help you achieve and maintain the healthy smile you deserve. On the web at baystatedental.com.
Underwriting support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Greater Westfield Chamber of Commerce, the voice of business for the Greater Westfield communities. Informing, educating, advocating, the Chamber provides opportunities for members to make meaningful connections on local, regional, and state levels. For more information on the Chamber's many events, workshops, and programs, as well as the benefits of membership, visit westfieldbiz.org. The Chamber focuses on the most important economy, yours.
Hi, it's Bob Plass, and I have Wow, It's Tuesday, every Tuesday, 6 to 8. Wow, it's Tuesday.
Community Radio 89.5 WSKB.
I did it!
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM, WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to On the Mark, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. We're broadcasting from Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB from Studio 120. Victor Acquista, the doctor-turned-author, is our guest this morning. He's the author of the award-winning book, Serpent Rising. It's part one of a two-part series under that title. And Victor, you are going to this is a world premiere. You're going to read something from Serpent Rising. It's the first time an author has ever read a segment of one of the books they've written. So take it away.
Okay, well, I don't know. I think people can see this. This is the book Serpent Rising. I do want to speak about that cover symbol in a moment, but first I'll just read the opening paragraph.
Okay, and for those of you that are listening on radio and can't see it, you can go to YouTube later on, and when you play the portion of this portion of On the Mark, you can see Victor holding the book.
Impact, crash, darkness. The bedside table lamp and shattered light bulb lay on the floor. But Serena remained unmoved, without will or inclination to clean up the mess. She stared at the ceiling of her tiny efficiency apartment, lit solely by the eerie neon green from the alarm clock's LED. The glass fragments glittered, taunting her to get out of bed. Instead, she pondered the much larger mess of her life. She lay still, in a familiar paralysis of apathy. Somehow a glimmer of hope broke through her complacence. She reached over and forced herself to set the alarm. Tomorrow, she had another job interview. Desperation crowded out the apathy. Constricted by overwhelming inner and outer darkness, Serena's breath became shallow. Her dry mouth and mounting anxiety muted her scream at life's injustice into a muffled croak. Tomorrow would come. Nothing would change. So that's the opening paragraph.
Well, that's a first for me. So thank you for doing that. So you talk about the graphic.
Yeah, I'll just hold it up again, and I understand that not everyone can see this visually, but there's a whitish colored snake biting the tail of a blackish colored snake, and they're forming a circle by that's surrounding a symbol, which is a yin-yang symbol, which has a sun and a moon in the two parts of the yin-yang symbol. Snake biting its tail is called an Ouroboros, and it's a symbol of cosmic harmony. The yin-yang also connotes a balance between masculine and feminine energies, the sun and the moon, sort of opposing polarities of light and darkness. And really the symbol is just full of these polarities that are in balance to one another. And for people who are familiar with myths and symbols and the work of people like Joseph Campbell, this kind of symbology has a lot of meaning.
Did you design that graphic, or did you have somebody else do that?
The storyline mentions this image as in a descriptive way, and I requested that this be represented on the cover. And my publisher did a really fine job, I think, in taking the language and then representing that in a really, I think, a very nice and attractive cover.
Now, you say that the second part, that Serpent Rising #1, the one that you just held up, is part of a two-part series of books. The second one is written and about to come out. What are some of the upcoming projects that you're working on?
Well, I recently finished a pop culture satire, which I'm shopping right now to find an agent. It's sort of a niche type of book. So trying to market that on my own or self-publish it would not be ideal. I always like working with a publisher, when I can find one that's interested in my work. I mentioned that short story that I recently finished that is sort of got a Twilight Zone vibe to it. I have that out right now to Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine. I don't know if they'll accept it. And then I have a book event at a local brewery coming up. So those are some of the things that are on my plate, either currently. As far as other writing projects, I have some more short stories in my head that are gestating right now. This period of, you conceive something, you gestate it, and then you go through a period of labor and delivery.
Right. So, with all of these things going on, if people wanted to learn more about Victor Acquista, do you have a social media presence these days, and do you have a website?
Yes. My website is www.victoracquista.com. I have interesting things there about my fiction and nonfiction, some other posts. I have a tab there that I call Podlogs, which have a series of 5 to 6 minute presentations with backstory and story elements that talk about things that are in the book. I have an events tab there, a little photo gallery and what have you. I'm very active on Facebook at my author page. I have a fairly active Twitter presence, and I recently, at the encouragement of my publisher, began doing some things on Instagram for the last 6 months or so.
So becoming an author, in addition to writing and pitching your work and promoting your work, it's like a 2 full-time job, right?
Well, that, and I didn't mention that I've been doing some podcasting. I had 40 podcasts over 2 seasons that I have under the heading Podfabula Productions. It's also searchable by my name. I have a YouTube channel for that and so on. And in that podcasting, I mostly narrate work of my own and other authors to feature them and give them more exposure. And it's very eclectic. It's a potpourri of fiction, nonfiction, ideas, and commentary.
And are any of your books and writings available as audiobooks?
Yes, Serpent Rising has an audio on Audible. And there haven't been many reviews on that, but the few reviews there are very, very favorable.
Did you do the recording, or did you have another voice?
No, actually, my publisher handled that whole process of selecting a narrator and producing and all the fun things that go into doing an audiobook.
Yeah. When you started out as a physician and going through medical school and getting your feet wet as a doctor, did you ever think that you would switch careers and become an author, or did that come to you after you had been in medicine for a while?
Well, again, I don't know how much active decision making there was, previously. When we were growing up, there was a book called Future Shock by Alvin Toffler, and he said, in the future, everybody's going to have multiple careers, and that sort of stuck with me. And after I segued from primary care, I got into administrative medicine, which was sort of a different career. And then I, in some respects, grew tired of that. It wasn't feeding me in the way, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, mostly spiritually. And so I had written a book while I was still working full time, but I had this other book in my head for 20 years. I said, you know what, now it's time to give that a try. And that was picked up by a publisher, which is, a little bit unusual at that early stage in my career. And then I just began writing more, and I'm writing more and more, and I'm going to roll with it for the time being. Who knows? Maybe there's another career. Maybe I'll become a radio broadcaster. What do you think? Is that a good career?
Well, I sort of like it. I mean, I rolled into it from other things. So, it's kind of fun. Victor, we're out of time, but I hope that you'll come back when the second edition of Serpent Rising comes out, and maybe some of your other books that are kind of floating around in your head.
Well, thank you, Mark. Actually, the series is called The Saga of Venom and Flame. Book 2 is called Revelation. So Serpent Rising is book 1 of the Saga of Venom and Flame.
Okay, and you can learn more about Victor's writings, both fiction and nonfiction, at his website, victoracquista.com. Victor, thanks for joining us. Good luck, and come do a book signing up here in Western New England.
I would love to.
Yeah, if you do that, you can come sit in the studio with me and read the second paragraph of Serpent Rising.
You're just
okay.
You're delightful. Thank you, Mark.
Be well, Victor. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with more On the Mark after some underwriting acknowledgments. You're listening or watching on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 or 89.5 FM WSKB. Peter Coles is our chief engineer this morning, and we'll be right back.
Underwriting for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Westfield, serving the youth of the Whip City and surrounding communities since 1969. For more information on the Great Futures Club for ages 3 to 5, happening weekdays, and the Club Teen Center for ages 11 and older, weekdays from 6:30 till 8 p.m., go online at bcgwestfield.org or visit the club at 28 West Silver Street. The Boys and Girls Club of Greater Westfield. Great futures start here. Underwriting support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Greater Westfield Chamber of Commerce, the voice of business for the Greater Westfield communities. Informing, educating, advocating, the Chamber provides opportunities for members to make meaningful connections on local, regional, and state levels. For more information on the Chamber's many events, workshops, and programs, as well as the benefits of membership, visit westfieldbiz.org. The Chamber focuses on the most important economy, yours.
Listen to me, Michael Buster McMahon, Mondays 8 to 10 a.m. to learn the stories behind your favorite songs. Or don't. I'm not the boss of you.
Community Radio 89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back, everyone, to On the Mark. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. We're broadcasting from Studio 120 in Westfield. If you've been going to farmers markets this summer or passing by farms here in Western Massachusetts, maybe going out and picking fresh strawberries or participating in a farm share, you know how important local farms are to our local economy. And many of you have heard or read about or tasted a lot of the great produce that comes from the very fertile soils around the Connecticut River. In fact, the asparagus or Hadley grass that grow here in Western Massachusetts are prized by cooks and chefs all over the country. And and they all look to Western Massachusetts for that. And maple syrup from our area is known internationally. So this morning we're going to be taking a little trip to CISA, the community involved in sustaining agriculture, with Claire Morenon, who is their communications pro. And when we talk about buying local food or sustaining our farmers who make agriculture possible here in Western Massachusetts, CISA has been doing that and working to maintain those people for over 25 years. So good morning, Claire.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm Mark. Peter's our chief engineer. So it's 25 years that CISA's been around. And what prompted CISA to start up and to support the farm movement?
Well, CISA was founded at a moment that local farms were really facing a lot of serious challenges in terms of their economic capacity to survive. So in the early 90s, we were sort of coming out of the farm crisis of the 80s. And so a group of community members and farmers got together and started thinking about what can we do to help farms here in the Connecticut River Valley thrive. And so they landed on using mass media tools to promote local farms and trying to convince the community that supporting local farms was worthwhile and could really make a difference. And so that's where the Be a Local Hero, Buy Locally Grown campaign came from. We've been running for the past 25 years. And since then, our work has shifted quite a bit so that we do a lot of work that's focused on supporting farms behind the scenes while we also, promote local food to our local community.
Do you have any idea how many local farms exist in Western Massachusetts at this point?
I think that the current count statewide is something like 7,000. We have about 250 to 300 who join our program every year, which is the Local Hero campaign. It's tough to count because, exactly how do you identify who's a farm and who's sort of a market garden, that sort of thing. But there are hundreds of farms in Western Mass. And
I understand that they've diminished over the years, that, that we were primarily an agrarian economy outside of the cities here in Western Massachusetts for a long time, but a variety of factors have diminished the number of working farms that are still out there.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, that's happened nationwide. We have slightly different factors here in Massachusetts. Largely, it's due to land pressure, extremely high cost of land, and higher production costs has made it harder for farms to keep going over the years. There's also been a fair amount of pressure on them to consolidate, more land and fewer farms. That's been a national trend that has happened here as well. Not just in Iowa, but
yeah. What are the most? What types of farms are the most significant now in the area? I know at one point there were a lot of dairy farms, but we seem to have lost a lot of those. But what kind of farm produce and what kind of producing farms are most prevalent?
We have a pretty interesting, to us at CISA anyway, a pretty interesting mix of farms. We have a number of farms that are relatively large for the Northeast. A couple hundred acres, and they might be growing squash or potatoes or onions, sort of more durable crops like that. Some of those bigger farms grow a variety of crops and sell them, through distributors. They sell them to schools, to supermarkets, that sort of thing. We also have seen a bit of a resurgence in the time that CISA's existed of farms that are much smaller. You mentioned CSAs and pick your own. At the beginning, we've seen a number of farms that are smaller and that are growing a variety of crops that are meant to be sold directly to customers. And so, it's really an interesting mix. And it's not just produce. I mean, we do still have dairy farms here. They have fallen in number, but they continue to manage quite a bit of the land base locally because dairy requires quite a bit of land to grow feed and that sort of thing. So we have dairy, we have small farms that are making cheese, we have fiber farms, we have maple, which you mentioned. So it runs the gamut. I would say that the majority of the farms that we work with are produce and fruit farms.
I was really surprised because a few months ago we interviewed a couple of farmers that started a nut farm, and they're growing hazelnuts in Cummington, I believe was the
Yes,
town, which I
right.
found kind of unique. And um, uh, do we have here in Western Mass the similar variety, let's say, that another state might have, or does the climate restrict what we can do here?
Yeah, certainly compared to what people are able to grow in California, we have a smaller variety of types of crops. I do know of a couple projects people are working on reintroducing nut trees. Um, we have people who have grown wheat and grains and that sort of thing. A couple of farms have figured out how to grow ginger and turmeric in greenhouses and that sort of thing. So people are experimental, but certainly our climate and our short growing season does limit the options.
Yeah, when we talk about buying local, people go into their supermarkets now and they're demanding stuff that's grown locally, and they're also demanding a lot of organic things, which is much different, perhaps, than the marketplace was 25 years ago when CISA started. Who are some of the major local heroes in terms of selling local produce?
In terms of grocery stores,
Yeah, grocery stores and retail.
yeah, well, I think it might depend on which farms you talk to, because it feels like a space for a lot of different types of retail businesses to be working with different scales of farms. So, we have bigger farms that sell to Market Basket in other parts of the state, and they sell to Big Y locally. And those farms have to be able to grow on a particular scale in order to meet the needs of those sorts of retailers. And then we have grocery stores like River Valley Co-op in Northampton and soon to be East Hampton, Big E, Foster, some of the smaller independent retailers. And they're able to work with smaller farms and to manage smaller amounts of produce and to take, a little bit more of a risk on newer producers. And that's really important too. So it's hard to say who the most important are because we have such a variety of different types of farm businesses that really have different needs in terms of, are they growing hundreds of acres of something and they need to get it out the door to a large retailer, or are they trying to get their foot in the door as a new business? So I will say that the retailers, most people buy their groceries at grocery stores, not at small farm stands or farmers markets, although those are really important too. But that connection between farms and retailers is really important just because of the realities of how most people buy food.
Exactly. Although, when I drive to and from work, I pass a couple of farm stands and there are farmers markets available. So people really, if they try, they can find locally grown food wherever. And one of the things that CISA does is to market and promote who these farmers are and where they are, so that people can go out and find the local things that they want close by. I know farmers markets are very popular and almost every community has one or two, but there's a thing known as a farm share. Can you explain what a farm share means and how that supports a local farm?
Yeah. So farm share, another term for it is CSA, or community supported agriculture. And the idea is that members of a community can buy a share, in quotes, in a local farm, meaning that they commit at the beginning of the season and sometimes pay up front, sometimes pay in installments, and then they receive a share of whatever that farm grows throughout the course of the season. So you might pay a couple of $100s in March, and then that means that you're getting produce every week from June through October. Some farms do it that sell meat or herbs or plants or other types of products. The majority of them are vegetables. And it's a bit of a win-win situation. It means that farms get cash at the beginning of the season when they are spending a lot of money to get up and running and don't have any cash flow yet. And it also means that they can devote less of their energy throughout the season to marketing and trying to, find customers, and more of their energy to just growing food and getting it to people. And it also can be a more affordable option on the balance for consumers. And it's a way for people to have an ongoing relationship with a farm. So if you go to a farm every week, you can see what they're growing. You can see what really went well that year and what didn't go so well. Oftentimes they offer pick your own and a newsletter and recipes and that sort of thing, so that you can really sort of deepen your relationship with the farm that's producing your food.
Yeah, and they also introduce, one of the things that I've learned is that they introduce foods and vegetables and fruits that perhaps you've never seen before. I participated in a farm share in Springfield for several years, and they had a fruit called a ground cherry that was very indigenous to Massachusetts that I had never seen before. And now I just can't wait till they come available. And the other one was sugar plums. You know, we all from the story of the Nutcracker going back knew what sugar plums were, but there are several local farmers that grow them. It's probably the best tasting fruit off a tree I've ever had.
Yeah, I think celeriac and kohlrabi are some of the other oddball, knobby vegetables that people experience often for the first time through a CSA. But yeah, it is a great way to, you know, get to know some different types of produce. And often we hear from people with kids a lot that it's a really fun way to engage children in the whole process of like going and picking up the share and doing pick your own if they have it, and, you know, learning what can we do with this strange vegetable and cooking and all of that. So it can be a really, you know, engaging way to get your food.
Now, I know that CISA does a lot to promote and market these area farms, farmers markets, and all of that. And that in previous years, that you had like a catalog or a brochure that described all of the area farms and opportunities. Do you still have that?
We don't do a printed listing of all of the farms in our region, but we do have an online guide, which is at buylocalfood.org/farm guide. And it's searchable, so you can look, if you just want to see what's near you, you can search by region. If you want to find a restaurant or a grocery store or pick your own or a farm stand or some specific outlet, you can search that way. And if you're looking for a particular type of food, like if somebody wants to go find ground cherries, you can go search that way too. So depending on what you're looking for, we are keeping track of everything that's happening in the valley and where people can find it.
Okay, we're going to take a very fast break to acknowledge our underwriters, so we're going to come back and talk more about CISA and local farms and farmers markets and whet your appetite, so to speak, to go to your local farm stand and pick up some of the good things that are around and about. Our underwriters are very important to us, and we're always glad to acknowledge them. Peter Coles is our chief engineer this morning. I'm Mark Auerbach. You are either watching us on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15, listening to us on 89.5 FM, WSKB. And if you've missed a part of today's program or you want to catch some of the previous ones, they are all archived on YouTube at WSKB Community Radio's YouTube page. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Underwriting is brought to you by Boise Cascade Distribution, providing products and services needed for building material dealers, home improvement centers, and industrial customers. They offer everything from engineered wood and plywood to Drex decking and railing, James Hardie siding, and Advantech subfloor. Located at 33 Fowler Street Extension in Westfield and on the web at bc.com, they are committed to providing quality products, great service, convenience, and value.
Underwriting for Community Radio on WSKB is brought to you in part by Rockies. Over 30 convenient locations throughout Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Florida. One of the nation's largest ACE dealers. Expertise and great product selection in paint, hardware, lawn and garden. That's Rockies. Rock solid service since 1926. On the web at rockies.com.
This is Ken Stomsky from Ken's Den on WCPC 15 and 89.5 FM, Tuesdays, 8 to 10.
Community Radio 89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM, WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to On the Mark, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. We're talking with Claire Morenon from CISA about farm shares, farmers markets, local farms, and buying local food. Claire, you walk into a Big Y or Stop and Shop or one of your farms stores during the middle of the winter, and you find fresh raspberries, and you find all of this stuff that's imported from farms all over the place. Why should we be supporting the local farm movement? Why is it important that our stuff's locally grown?
Yeah, well, there are lots of reasons to support local farms. I think perhaps the most important is that it is a really valuable way to support our local economy and our local land base. When local farms thrive, that means that they are providing jobs, they're putting money back into our local economy, they're stewarding vast swaths of open land. And there's also, I think, a little bit of a softer reason, aside from those more practical considerations, which is that we have a really vibrant community around local farms here in the Valley. Farmers markets are great community gathering places. The connections between farms and their customers and the stores that they sell to and the restaurants that they sell to, that is a very meaningful network of community support and community connections. And so when people support local farms, they are contributing to all of the value that they bring to us locally.
And I think one of the things that we forget is when we drive out, as they say, into the country and you drive by a farm and you see rolling hills and pastures and stuff, if these farms don't survive as farms, what you're going to end up seeing is another housing development. Right. So if we want that little balance between city and country, those farms are very important.
Yes, and land doesn't come back from housing developments. Once it's developed, that's it. And so, if you care about open space and, farms also steward quite a bit of wooded land and habitat of all sorts. So it's really important for environmental reasons.
I was very lucky to go to a high school that had a working farm on it. And not only did the farm produce produce that was served to the students, but they also produced things like maple syrup and lavender, which was sold to the public. And their farm stand included all kinds of soaps and candles and everything that smelled of lavender. Where do kids today get an opportunity to learn about farms? Does CISA encourage the local farms to teach the community about what farming is all about?
We don't have programs that are specifically focused on that, but there are a number of farms that welcome groups of school children to their farms and do tours and that sort of thing. We have a number of farms that do farm camps, so kids can come during school vacation or in the summer to learn about what's happening on the farm. And there are a number of programs in different parts of the region. In Springfield, the Springfield Food Policy Council has been doing a lot of work with school gardens to help bring some of the agricultural education and food exposure to students at school. So yeah, there are a lot of different things that are happening locally related to getting kids out there and showing them how food's grown.
How long have you personally been involved with CISA?
I've been at CISA since 2006.
Okay, so you've seen the organization grow and diversify over the years.
Yes.
Has there been one or two experiences that you've had working with CISA, like aha moments when you said, I didn't realize a farm could produce that, or wow, this is an interesting product that's happening locally that you had no idea about?
I feel like there are a million moments like that. But the things that come to mind are less for me about specific crops and more about just the ways that our food system has changed. So I feel like one big aha moment was when we started seeing winter farmers markets in the region. There was one day when CISA was hosting a one-day winter market, which was a bit of an experiment in Northampton. And we had some sense that there would be a lot of interest in eating local food year-round. But the doors opened that morning and, just this huge crowd of people poured in. And that was really gratifying. And it was also kind of the realization like, oh, there's a lot of support for local food that isn't just about tomatoes and raspberries and the most exciting summer crops. And so we have seen growth in the number of winter markets throughout the region over the years. And that has been pretty cool to see. Another thing that I think has shifted is more of a marriage between the local food movement, people who are focused on local food and farms, and anti-hunger work. That's something that has really grown in the time that I've been at CISA. There have always been farms that really want to make sure that they are growing food for their whole community and that cost isn't a barrier. But we've also seen a number of new programs and projects that really are focused on helping people low-income people who don't have access to enough food, making sure that they are able to buy local food and have those relationships with farms.
And I've heard it mentioned that there are places in New England and Western Mass that are considered to be food deserts, where people that live there that don't have access to transportation can't find fresh produce in their neighborhoods. And so their diets are not what they could be in terms of balance. How can we as a community make sure that food deserts don't exist in our area?
Yeah, well, one thing that I think is making a big difference, at least as far as it overlaps with the local food work, is HIP, which is the Healthy Incentives Program. That's a statewide program that provides people who are using SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, with an instant rebate when they buy produce from participating farms. So this is a little bit of an advocacy plug. That program's been around for a number of years now and has made really a huge difference for families who rely on SNAP in terms of them being able to access fresh local produce. And it's made a huge difference for many of the farms that participate in terms of being able to reach a whole new group of people. And so every year there's advocacy around making sure that program is fully funded so that it can continue to run and so that it doesn't get interrupted during the year. We also have been working to make sure that people who have SNAP benefits know that the program exists. So there's a new map on CISA's website that shows people where all of the locations are that they can earn HIP. And so we're trying to get the word out about that too.
Yeah. And let's backtrack for a second. What kind of produce are offered at a winter market?
Oh, it's actually a pretty surprising range. I think, people imagine a few potatoes rattling around, but there are a lot of farms that have invested in season extension infrastructure. So they're able to grow greens throughout the entire year. They don't grow that much during the winter, but they're able to harvest them. So you can find kale and spinach and even some herbs and that sort of thing. A whole bunch of root vegetables and squashes, other sorts of storage vegetables, that type of thing. And plus all of the products that are available year round anyway. So meat and cheese and maple syrup and honey and all of that good stuff.
We know that asparagus that the valley is known for asparagus. When you talk to people in other parts of the country, what do they perceive are the prime products that are grown here in Western Massachusetts?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I feel like it is asparagus. The Hadley grass has its own reputation. Maple syrup. I mean, I think honestly, in a lot of the country, depending on who you're talking to, people are surprised that there are still farms in Massachusetts at all, because people think of Boston.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's actually, just a huge range of farms and different crops here. I think Hadley grass might be the only one that has, jumped the state boundaries in terms of fame.
And the people that are not that don't necessarily go to farmers markets will realize that a lot more restaurants have come into the area that are utilizing local products and cooking what's in season. I know in the Berkshires in particular, you hear about these chefs that have set up restaurants of all kinds of cuisines that are here because they're utilizing local produce. They're not importing anything.
Yes, we definitely have a number of restaurants here that have a commitment to sourcing from local farms and who shape their menus around what's in season. And it's fun to talk to them because they get so excited about, what's coming in and what they're going to do with it, and how they're going to prepare it for guests. But yeah, I do feel like once you start looking, you'll see our local hero sign at grocery stores and at restaurants, and there really is local food pretty much everywhere these days.
Yeah, Claire, we're out of time, and I want to thank you for joining us. But before we go, if people want to learn more about the programs and services that CISA offers, how can they find out?
You can find everything at buylocalfood.org.
A great place to go to start. And Claire Morenon, thank you so much for joining us today. And you've made me hungry. As soon as this program ends, I'm going to hit one of the farm stands on my way home.
Thank you, Mark.
And that wraps up another program on the Mark here on Westville Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. If you've missed a portion of today's program and you want to hear it again, or you've missed some of the other programs that we've done, or just want to check out what we do on the Mark or Athenaeum Spotlight or Arts Beat here or any of the other programs on our community radio and TV programs, you can find them all archived at WSKB Community Radio. Peter Coles has been our chief engineer today. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach, and we'll catch you next week with another edition of On the Mark.
I spent my money today on something that I had my heart set. Just like a lady in vogue, I feel like one of the smart set. I didn't buy pearls like other girls, I didn't buy diamond rings, I didn't buy clothes or fancy hose or a canary bird that sings, but I got a pair of new shoes, polished up and paid for. Honey, they were made for going to town. Got a pair of new shoes, pretty patent leather. Gotta get together, going to town. Prouder than a peacock, strutting down the street. Haven't you heard I'm like a bird with wings on my feet? I've got a pair of new shoes, polished up and paid for. Honey, they were made for going to town. Got a pair of new shoes, polished up, paid for. Honey, they were made for going to town. Got a pair of new shoes, a pair with pretty patent leather. Watch me step, hey!